Well, actually, I got a promotion. I'm now the director of the U.S. office. I just love it. At a meeting in Hamburg, Germany, they said, "Well, what title do you want?" They just sort of come up with this climate policy officer thing, And I said, "Well, how about Supreme Commander of North America?" Because I'm also in charge of Canada. We forgot about Mexico. I'm sorry.
I think the job is vacant.
But right. And half the Germans looked around and thought, "Is he serious?" And the other thought, "Well, that's reasonable." Oh, God. The question before this panel today, right, is about making community power happen, right? And I just want to add a little phrase at the end of that, given that the house is on fire, right? Because we heard earlier from Bruce about the climate scientists and how they've really significantly underestimated the speed and the momentum in which greenhouse gas-driven ocean heating and biospheric stress is taking place, right? And we knew that before this fifth report, of the draft of the fifth report was coming out, because the nature of scientists is to be sort of conservative. They want to cover their hind end, right, in their peer review process. And that's all well and good, but we also need to know the truth of things and what's actually going on. So if it's worse than what they've been letting us on, and it is, that means to me that we have to prepare for a 4-degree world, a 4-degree centigrade average temperature rise. And you may recall in Copenhagen 2 years ago at the climate change meetings, they were fighting to try to stay under 2-degree average rise. And groups like Greenpeace and Rainforest Action Network are screaming, saying, "Are you kidding me? 2 degrees is scary stuff." With crop failures, you could think of 1 billion people dying off in a 2-degree world. That's not the goal. But in fact, we may go to a 4-degree world. Well, that means that we're really faced with the need for kind of rapid, dramatic changes in nearly everything we do, right? And so what does that mean then for your work in this arena? What's it mean for the mission of your very life itself, right? Well, for many of you, I expect it means kind of stay the course, because largely what you're doing is you're working towards community power. You're working towards community resilience and local systems that are going to be needed in this 4-degree world. But for others, it's time for a major rethink, right? Because I want you to think back, not to how we got into this, think back to the 60s and the hippies. Those hippies, they were out there clamoring for a more socially just, more ecologically sustainable world, right? And what essentially was the strategy through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the turn over to the 21st century, the first decade in the 21st century? You could boil the strategy down to essentially, look, all we want is a more socially just, ecologically sustainable world. A little bit of common sense and reason ought to get us there. But in fact, common sense and reason have turned out to be vastly insufficient as tools to get the job done, right? So 50 years has gone by and things are getting worse. And you may have heard that radiation hit Southern California today from Japan, right? It's not a pretty picture. So we have to come up with a new strategy, obviously, right? That's why we're here. In our scenario, you could call that previous scenario the soft landing scenario. My friend Diane Dumanowski refers it to that. Common sense and reason. We just thought that, we had kind of forever to get the job done, and yeah, the evil empire was being recalcitrant, but aren't they going to be recalcitrant? And if we just keep slogging away, we'll get it done eventually. Well, that's what she describes as kind of an elevator sense or linear sense of how the future is going to unfold. But nature is nonlinear. It's going to do a lot of this to us. That's what climate chaos is all about, right? So our new strategy is to realize, of course, that nature is very powerful, right? You can just think the fact that the main island of Japan is now 8 feet closer to the United States. That earthquake alone caused a change in the wobble and axis of the Earth, and the 24-hour day now is a bit shorter because of that. I mean, that's just a sense of nature's power. There's an adage from the hippies used to talk about, nature bats last, you know, and we should rev that one up and use it a lot in our rhetoric. So we realize, of course, that industrial civilization is falling apart and quite brittle, right? No need to go into that in any great detail. But we also need to realize that slipping into what you could call the Dick Cheney road warrior fascist world is a really, really, really unattractive narrative, right? And so when you think how bad things are, it's often, you know, sort of depressing, and you could think that we're going to slip into that sort of Dick Cheney fascist world, you know, and we all felt it a bit in the second administration, I think, of the Bush, President Cheney and Bush. For a while, but fortunately we survived that, at least for the moment. Well, and also fortunately there's another narrative, and that other narrative essentially says that community and cooperation are really just perfectly natural human tendencies. They just need to be nurtured, right? And for those of you who agree with, you know, the sort of serious state of things and the fact that we can build synergistic communities, our job really is to nurture those tendencies, and that's of primary importance. But we have to put a fire under our own feet, and we have to really work feverishly at this point in time, because the house indeed is on fire. Now, Angelina told us that the German-style renewable energy policy has a lot of, you know, exciting components to it and can really help us advance community power. And community power is really important because if you get large numbers of people, in the case of Germany, you actually get a check, right? There's 2 meters on your barn if you're a farmer, right? One to buy electricity and one to sell electricity. And you get a check in the mail for being part of the solution. You know, that builds a kind of army of people who are part of the solution and like it. And that's a great way to do outreach. It's fundamentally important. So we're at a point in time historically here in the state of California where, you know, we can make that sort of clean contract feed-in tariff approach work here. But we really need to make it work for the regular folks, you know, from the, you know, I think we need to make it work for small projects, medium projects, and large projects. And we need it to work for all forms of renewable energy because we need it all at once. It's just fundamentally important. But we really have to democratize how we produce power here in the state of California, because the people who produce power and share it with their neighbors and communities, they hold increasingly more power over the sort of corporate masters who've got us into this mess. And you know, I'm going to be focused over this next year in 2 sort of odd arenas around community power, and that's the feed-in tariff clean contract approach. You know, it can be done at a national level like they did in Germany. It can be done at a state government level like we could do it here in California. Vermont's already done it. It could be done at a municipal utility like Gainesville, Florida, or Sacramento and SMUD. But there's a new strategy where other cities could do it, even though they're not municipal utilities, and I'm going to be working on that. If that pans out, then that is going to radically increase the number of potential players who could use this community power approach. And then there's also something called rural electric co-ops throughout the country, very important to the country's grid. And they've been thought to be a hard sell on this kind of community power. But when they realize that farmers can get a check from it and it becomes another revenue center for a family farmer, then I think we're going to need them on our side. And also we're going to need the food growing prowess of the rural regions. One of the last things that I did as Director of Sustainability here in Oakland was to ask the City Council to commission a report on how Oakland could produce 1/3 of its food from rooftop and community gardens and a relationship in 100 miles in the surrounding farmers. So there's lots of great work that needs to be done. Community power itself is really fundamentally important to that, and it's going to help us build the kind of army that's going to help us get to that more socially just and ecologically sustainable world. Thank you.